When Catherine stumbled upon a letter written by Diana herself, the room fell silent. This wasn't just history preserved in ink. It was a revelation, sealed away for decades, waiting for the right moment to surface. But no one expected it to be addressed to Princess Charlotte. The granddaughter Diana would never meet. In that instant, Catherine felt the weight of generations pressing against her chest, as if the walls themselves carried the secret Diana had hidden away. It was found, in the quietest of moments, tucked delicately among Diana's private effects that had been sealed away after her tragic passing. Catherine, already familiar with every detail of her late mother-in-law's handwriting, froze as her eyes caught the unmistakable curves of Diana's script. The ink had not faded. The paper had aged, but not weakened like a voice frozen in time, waiting to speak. Her pulse raced as she read the name on the envelope, and her breath caught when she saw the intended recipient. Not William, not Harry, but Charlotte. The granddaughter Diana had never lived to hold in her arms. A shiver passed through Catherine. Questions surged immediately. Why had Diana written to a child who was yet unborn? Why bypass her own sons, and instead leave her words for a little girl whose destiny was still unwritten? The choice was deliberate, and it terrified Catherine, for it suggested foresight, as if Diana had known her legacy would live on through Charlotte in ways no one else could imagine. For a long moment, Catherine's fingers trembled as she held the sealed letter. Instinct told her to leave it untouched, to preserve it for the future, for Charlotte herself to discover when she was old enough to carry the burden. Yet maternal instinct overpowered hesitation. Charlotte was far too young to comprehend the meaning of her grandmother's words. Someone had to guard the truth until the time was right. And so Catherine, with hands heavy from the weight of history, broke the seal. The air seemed to change as her eyes fell on the first line. She had expected warmth, perhaps a blessing from a grandmother who never had the chance to meet her granddaughter. But instead, the opening words filled her with a sorrow so raw that tears instantly welled in her eyes. It was not the voice of comfort she had anticipated, but the voice of warning, haunting, prophetic, almost as if Diana had reached through, time to place her hand upon Catherine's shoulder. Each sentence drew Catherine deeper into a revelation she was not prepared to face. The ink was only words, but behind every letter she could hear Diana's voice, as though it had been waiting years for this exact moment to be heard. And as her tears spilled freely onto the paper, Catherine realized she was no longer reading a letter written in the past. She was confronting a message meant for the future, one that could shatter the fragile order of the monarchy. But what lay inside the letter was far more than a grandmother's blessing. It was a warning, one that would fracture the monarchy to its core. Charlotte, Diana had written, "If you are reading this, then fate has played its cruel hand." Those first lines alone shattered Catherine. This wasn't a love letter. It was a prophecy. The words seemed to leap from the page as if Diana herself had returned, speaking not to the child who was years away from even understanding such burdens, but to the mother who now clutched those pages with trembling hands. The letter was not written in celebration, nor in joy. It was soaked in warning, each line heavy with the knowledge that history had not yet finished its cruel work. Diana's voice, though long silenced, seemed to echo with startling clarity. The tenderness of a mother was there, wrapped in every phrase, but so was the sorrow of a woman who had walked through fire and knew how merciless the crown could be. Her words were both a lullaby and a lament, as if she wished to cradle Charlotte from beyond the grave, while simultaneously preparing her for a world that would seek to break her spirit. For Catherine, every sentence was a knife gentle in tone, but sharp with the truth it carried. What stopped Catherine cold was the warning. Diana wrote of a woman who would fight to sit on the throne, someone whose ambition would cloud judgment and threaten the very balance of the monarchy. Catherine could not ignore the chilling shadow these words cast, a shadow that seemed to point unmistakably toward Camilla. It was as if Diana, decades before, had seen the struggle that now consumed the palace, the silent war between the spirit of a beloved princess and the determination of a queen who would never yield. The prophecy deepened as Diana described the scrutiny Charlotte would endure. She wrote of comparisons, of whispers in the corridors, of a future where her granddaughter would be forced to live under the same harsh light that had once destroyed her own innocence. Diana warned that the public, hungry for echoes of the past, would constantly hold Charlotte against her grandmother's image, never allowing her to grow free of the shadow Diana had left behind. To Catherine, this was not simply foresight. It was tragedy unfolding in slow motion. But amid the sorrow, Diana's words carried strength. She urged Charlotte never to surrender herself to the crown's cold demands. She begged her to remember that a heart untamed was worth more than any jewel or title. "Do not trade love for duty," the words declared, and Catherine could almost hear Diana's voice breaking as she wrote them. It was advice born of her own torment, an intimate truth gifted across generations. Catherine read and reread, unable to stop herself from clinging to every phrase. It was as though Diana's presence filled the room, her spirit alive in every carefully chosen word. Catherine could feel her mother-in-law beside her, not as a memory, but as a guide, pressing her to protect Charlotte, to shield her from the destiny the crown might impose. The bond between the two women, one alive, one gone, suddenly felt unbreakable, united by love for the little girl who bore Diana's blood. By the time she reached the final paragraph, Catherine could no longer contain herself. Tears streamed down her face. Not soft, but uncontrollable, the kind of sobs that left her breathless. For in those final lines, Diana had laid bare a truth Catherine could not ignore. Betrayal and rivalry were inevitable, and the child she adored would one day be at the center of it. Diana had foreseen all the power struggles, the comparisons, the cruelty, and in this moment, Catherine realized she was holding more than just a letter. She was holding a curse, one that threatened to consume everything. Yet Catherine's tears were only the beginning, because in Diana's warnings lay accusations that threatened to unravel the throne itself. Catherine's sobs carried through the corridors of Kensington Palace, but Camilla's reaction was far colder. Where Catherine wept for truth, Camilla saw only the danger of Diana's words, tearing apart everything she had built. The letter had already shattered Catherine, reducing her to tears in front of the few aides she trusted. Her voice trembled as she confessed the contents, repeating Diana's warnings as though they were thunder echoing from the grave. For those who listened, there was no doubt. These words carried more weight than prophecy. They carried judgment. But as news reached Camilla, her response was swift and merciless. To her, this letter was not a sacred message of foresight, but the ramblings of a woman she insisted had been confused in her final days. She dismissed it as nothing more than the delusions of a troubled woman, her tone sharp, her dismissal final. Yet her cold rejection did not silence the palace. It inflamed it. Those who had remained loyal to Diana's memory, who still whispered her name in reverence, recoiled at Camilla's contempt. They saw her not as a queen protecting the throne, but as a woman cornered, desperate to erase a truth she could not control. The tension grew unbearable. William found himself standing in the middle of a storm he could not calm. On one side was Catherine, broken and shaken, clutching a letter that carried his mother's voice. On the other was Camilla, furious and defiant, determined to silence any suggestion that Diana's shadow still ruled from beyond the grave. For William, the conflict was more than political. It was personal. His wife's grief and his stepmother's denial were tearing open wounds that had never truly healed. And then came the whispers. What had begun as a secret, shared among a few, trusted aides soon leaked beyond the palace gates. Diana left a letter for Charlotte, murmured across the nation, became a headline too powerful to contain. The public, long starved for any glimpse of Diana's lost voice, clung to the rumor with feverish intensity. Crowds began to gather outside, pressing flowers and notes once more against the iron gates, as though Diana's presence had returned to haunt them all. The effect was instant and devastating. Opinion polls shifted dramatically, revealing a nation rallying behind Catherine, their sympathies swelling as they imagined the future queen breaking down under the weight of Diana's truth. At the same time, suspicion and resentment turned toward Camilla, whose cold dismissal was seen as proof that she feared Diana's words more than she feared the public's judgment. Every statement she made in defense of herself only deepened the chasm between her and the people. Within the palace walls, a chill set in. What had been a family secret was now a national storm, and no amount of denial could contain it. Catherine's tears had become a symbol of innocence betrayed, while Camilla's shadow loomed darker than ever before. William, caught in the clash, began to realize that the letter was no longer just a private revelation. It had become a weapon capable of toppling everything the crown stood for. But the monarchy's walls would truly begin to shake when William himself confronted his mother's ghost through the same letter Catherine had held in trembling hands. For William, reading his mother's final words was like reopening a wound that had never healed. But now, with Charlotte's name written across the page, it became more than personal. It became a matter of legacy. Alone in the quiet of the palace, he traced every sentence with shaking hands, reliving the ache of losing Diana, yet feeling her presence more fiercely than ever before. The letter did not merely speak to Charlotte's future. It demanded William confront his own, leaving him torn between duty to the crown and loyalty to his family. Should Charlotte ever know the truth? Or would revealing it condemn her to the same torment that had destroyed Diana? The dilemma suffocated him, each option carrying the weight of betrayal. Anne's voice cut through the silence, urging that Diana's words must not be buried. She believed the letter was more than a warning, it was Diana's legacy, and ignoring it would be an insult to her memory. Catherine clung to that conviction as well, her tears hardening into resolve. But Camilla was relentless. She pressed Charles to dismiss the letter as irrelevant, branding it a dangerous relic from a past that threatened the stability of the present. For the king, torn between his wife and his son, silence seemed the safest weapon, but his inaction only deepened the fractures spreading across the monarchy. Beyond the palace gates, the whispers grew into a roar. The people, long hungry for Diana's voice, declared her foresight prophetic. Crowds lit candles, laid flowers, and proclaimed that Catherine, broken yet unbowed, was now the true heir to Diana's battle. For many, the letter proved what they already felt in their hearts, that Catherine embodied the spirit of the people's princess, while Camilla represented everything Diana had once warned against. Charlotte, innocent and unaware, suddenly became the living symbol of a prophecy too powerful to ignore. It was as though Diana had reached from the grave to shape the destiny of the crown. And through Catherine's tears, Charlotte's innocence, and William's torment, the people's princess had returned to haunt the monarchy that once silenced her. And so, as the monarchy trembles under Diana's lingering shadow, one thing is certain: her words have ignited a fire that no crown can ever extinguish. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.